All right, I'm from Virginia, so I talk fast and with a twang, so hopefully you can keep up. And I'm really loud, so I apologize if you can hear me in the back and your ears are bleeding. All right, why design your podcast first? This seems kind of like a no-brainer. We found out just a little while ago from Mr. Rob Walsh, there's 900,000 podcasts out there in the world in the Apple directory. There's a problem with that, though. The problem is, and he said 200,000, but those numbers, we disagree on that. There's really only 100,000 live shows out there. So ask you this question. Why are there 800,000 dead ones? Well, the problem is most of them are poorly planned, lacking in purpose, and winging it. But if their RSS feed is still alive, they're still out there. So as you start your podcast, you have to compete with all this garbage. And what I like to call podwrecks. What's a podwreck? That's a podcast that's been out there collecting subscribers forever and doesn't go away. So now you're competing with a ghost. So how do you fix that? How do you get past this and survive? And really you do that through three pretty good ways of doing this that everyone can do. This is not something you have to go to school for or get a BFA and understand design. It's really clarity, pretty simple. You probably heard this a lot at this conference. You can hear it more times. It's going to be narrow purpose, something we're going to talk about here in a minute, and good design principles. Hello. Howdy. I'm Kyle Bondo. I'm the co-founder of Podwrecking and the co-founder of GagglePod. We're a podcast design studio in Virginia, and we're trying to make podcasting simple. And hopefully, with this presentation, it'll be a little simpler for you. I hope. That's my hope for this, okay? So at the end of this, I hope that you come away with this going, got it. Sound good? If you want my slides, piece of cake, just go to gagglebot.com/podfest 2020. I got my slides there, tons of other free stuff. You can have it all. We don't hide this stuff. All right. So what's really design about? Design is really about constraints. Now, what you need to focus on with your podcast is that you need to make decisions. And your decisions will modify and change and control how your podcast actually functions. And this is where a lot of podcasters get in trouble, is they want to be all things to all people. Now, I want to give you a little challenge. And that challenge is I want you to define this show for me. In fact, I brought their show art to see if you can figure this out, right? So this show is very popular in its niche. In fact, some would say it is the most popular in its niche. Hosts are dedicated to their cause. Content is always on point. Their audience knows exactly what to expect. And their talent lives their why. They know exactly why they do this. When you see their show art, you're like, oh, I totally know what I'm about to get. Any guesses? Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, This American Life. Nobody? Piece of cake. Pirates. When a pirate shows up on your back door of your ship, you know exactly what you're about to receive. You know everybody on that crew is about to give you 100% of their content. You know that content is going to be delivered to you in a way that everybody knows is coming to you. There is no, what do you call it? There's no ambiguity with how pirates operate. Now, I use this demonstration to illustrate a point, and that is your podcast as clear and defined as the purpose and why of pirates? We'll find out. Let's get into this. How does this work? How do we get there? How do we get clarity and focus into your podcast? And it happens with 4 key things. First one is simple. What is your idea? Is it very clear? And I don't mean it's like, I want to do a podcasting about engineering. What kind of engineering? What type of engineering? What kinds of engineers are you focused on? Really, when you dig down to your core ideas, your podcast should come from at least one of 3 places. One, it should be something you're either passionate about, something that you really want to express to people, something you have experience in that you want to share, or maybe something you're curious in and also want to explore. Your first podcast should be something that you are both good at and passionate about. Why? Because podcasting is hard. If people tell you it's not hard, they're lying to you. Podcasting is difficult because you're going to get to a point at episode 7 or 13 where you're not too sure where you're going or why you're doing this, and you need that messy middle control. And this is why you need to pull from one of these three areas. What's the next one? Your direction. Sure, you got one topic, but you got multiple angles. What angle are you going after? Can you go to all angles? Well, all angles doesn't work. So let's pull directions from some places that actually do work. Now, in 2004, Guy Kawasaki, one of the founders of Apple, talked about making meaning. And he makes meaning with something he calls increasing the quality of life, righting a wrong, or preventing the end of something good. So pretty basic things to pull from. But you can also pull from challenging the status quo, grow a small idea into a big idea, or simplifying the world, or even just solving a mystery. These are great places to pull from in a direction. So what did we just do? We picked an idea. We're getting crispy down to our direction. We're starting to focus our direction. We're starting to move down in that narrow focus. So what's the next thing? This is really kind of 2 in 1. Is who are you doing this for? Now, this may seem very obvious, but this is a difficult thing podcasters struggle with all the time. Finding your smallest possible audience is hard. So how do we do that? First, we need perspective. We need to go and find what other voices are talking in our space. I talked to a lady last night who's into a podcast on cheese. Yes, cheese. Guess how many podcasts are in her space? 0. Blue ocean. That's kind of cool. If you're doing a podcast on podcasting like I do with my co-host Tim Bryan for Podwrecking, we do a podcast about podcasting where there are like 400 shows that do that kind of stuff. What are they saying? What are they not saying? What won't they talk about? What are 2 ideas that you can put together that no one else can put together because you have a unique experience to do that? These are the kind of things that help you get perspective. Sometimes it's picking a fight, picking a side, but knowing who's on the other side so you know what their argument's going to be. And then you make some rules. My podcast about podcasting won't do X. What is X? We don't cuss. We may say, crap or darn, that kind of thing. But we don't cuss. We make some rules. We're already starting to narrow our focus down even more. Then you have to find your audience in the most crispy way. Now, if I wanted to do a podcast about pirates, I would say, okay, all history people. That makes sense. Maybe, okay, that's a little too big. Maybe it's all military history, maybe nautical history. Still too big. Really, if I'm doing a podcast about pirates, obviously my audience should be pirate people who love pirates. Pretty simple. But this is a difficult concept, so you need to constantly be refining down to the smallest possible audience you can think of. And the smaller, the better. Think about cheese. So, the why are you podcasting really comes down to figuring out your purpose, because that gives you the energy to propel yourselves forward. When you can go back to your why, you can create the energy you need to move past episode 13, move past, heck, maybe even move past episode 1. So let's apply the why. Identify our core idea, we establish a direction, we select a perspective, and we found our audience. Well, how do we put all that together? Well, I podcast about blank to people who like blank. Pretty simple. Let's choose a cheese lady. I podcast about cheese for people who like, you guessed it, cheese. Pretty simple. Let's add a little detail to this, a little meat on the bone. I'm just going to break this up and to say, okay, well, talent. Who's your talent? Is it you? Is it co-host? Is it you and some guests? Well, your podcast would be about your idea. What is that crispy idea you're working at? The direction and audience we just talked about. And you're ready to hear your perspective. Your bias is really what this is called. And everyone has a bias in a podcast. You have a side. You pick the side. Use it to your advantage to guide your content. And then do not stop until you reach this thing. I know some people struggle with this one. It's a goal. What's your definition of done? How do you know your podcast is done? Now, some people call it seasons. Some people are never done. They're going to talk about this at the end of days. Because you go back to that direction stuff, maybe you're trying to, right a wrong. Maybe righting the wrong never happens. So let's put this in action. Let's connect the dots in a way maybe to help you really illustrate this so we can pound this home. Okay, let's identify the core idea. Now, if I wanted to create a podcast about pirates, I would go, well, my passion is military history. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran, and I've traveled, so I have experience, and I'm curious about pirates. So I can check all 3 of those boxes, but I'm pulling from at least one of those 3 areas. So my idea is pirate history. I'm really interested in underdog pirates that no one really knows about. And I want to tell this little known history of a pirate named Stead Bonnet. If you don't know who Stead Bonnet is, he's the guy behind Blackbeard. Kind of like his Blackbeard's the front guy. Stead Bonnet's the guy in the back bankrolling the whole thing. So let's identify the direction of this pirate podcast. I like the idea of preserving history. So that's kind of like my direction. I'm going to preserve the history. So I'm really interested in solving the mystery of who this guy was. And we're going to explore this pirate history of this guy and solve that mystery. That's my direction. So I'm solving the mystery, so my content starts to get guided towards, well, what kind of things are mysterious about this guy? And we go into perspective. And this is where we start to take, well, what's my point of view on this? I'm taking the pirate's point of view. I could cover all pirate history, and I found out there are podcasts that do that. They do everything. But no one covers this guy. And the other pirate podcasts do kid stories and games, and there was this movie out with some guy named Sparrow, and whoever that guy is. And we're on that. But my bias is really on this guy, the complete history. And then I'm going to connect this dots, and really, each season could only be, maybe this is a goal, maybe season 2 is a different pirate. So now I've got maybe even future episodes to go on to. And let's identify my audience. We already talked about this. History buffs? Maybe. Military nautical history? Okay, we're getting there. Fans of biographical pirate history? Bullseye. And that's the kind of way you need to niche this down. So I'm looking for those complete pirate story people in my audience. People who are really into historical mysteries? Maybe, as a side thing. But it's a pirate's life for me. Okay. So what's my why statement look like when I build that? Simple. I will podcast about the strange life of pirate Ted Bonnet and preserve the history of this man's journey from noble to notorious for those who love deep and mysterious pirate stories. One sentence, bang, it's got my purpose, my why, my direction, my perspective, my bias, my audience, all in one sentence. And anytime I get lost, anytime I don't know what I'm doing, anytime I'm frustrated, I go back and read this. Maybe I read this every time I sit down to record. Well, let's break this down. Where's all the pieces in it? All the pieces are there. Talent, goal, idea, direction, perspective, audience, all the pieces are there. Anytime you get lost, this is your guidepost. This is your lighthouse. This is your way back. And this is how you stop from Podwrecking, is you constantly refer back to this. Because if you have a why, you cannot get lost. Let's take it maybe a little bit further. Say I actually create this podcast. And this podcast, is all for the booty. And this is the same thing with Ted Bonnet. We join him following our deep mysteries, our historical journey, in one of the weirdest pirate's tales never told. So really, it becomes your direction statement or your description. When you go and put this into your, the podcast hosting, you've already written the description. You just add in some of the details, give it a name, and then you're off to the races. And this is really the basics behind, if you have this, you nail this down, that's when you buy a microphone. Thank you.